Hello and welcome to Cars and Fuel Episode 3. I am Lewis.
I'm Steffan.
And I'm Andrew.
That's Andrew. And so this is a show where we eat yummy food and we talk about cars and stuff, hence why we call it Cars and Fuel. It's been a while since the last episode. The last episode we talked about driver aids in cars and whether they are overall beneficial for drivers or if they're actually becoming a crutch and actually causing people to drive much more poorly. And it's beautiful that we talked about that last time because I have a great story to talk about a GTI that I bought recently. I'm in a GTI now. This is technically the second GTI I purchased within a time frame of about a month. So there's going to be a great story behind that. But first and foremost, what are we eating today, Steffan?
Today we've got garlic crush.
Excellent.
It's a nice little Mediterranean shop in Redmond.
Yeah, they have a couple locations, I think.
Oh, do they?
Yeah,
Okay.
they do.
Yeah.
So you can get the goodness
Good
everywhere.
stuff.
Good,
Oh,
yeah, good
that
stuff.
looks good. That looks good. I'm not sure what this is, but
I don't know, what is that?
I don't know.
Highly recommend their garlic fries. They season the heck out of them. Absolutely delicious.
Yeah, I have just the traditional Euro. We were going to get Indian food today, but we were dumb and we woke up about 2 hours ago, and so we thought maybe Indian food first thing in the morning, probably not the smartest. Yeah, get a table going down there. So I guess I will start then, because this kind of circles around my journey of buying a GTI, and so you guys can eat while I kind of do the intro, I guess, for that. But basically, it all started when I was born. No, it all started with a Saab that we filmed a couple months ago, and I will link that video somewhere up here or whatever. But we had if you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on TV, you obviously can't click on it. Yeah, click here. But, I sold the Saab, which I was kind of sad about. It was a great car. It was an 02 Saab 9.5 wagon, which is an incredibly rare car. It was extremely comfortable. I think we all really enjoyed that car, actually. There was lots of fun perks about the car. But, I bought that car as a daily, and reality set in that having an interesting 20-year-old car is not the best for a daily vehicle. Mostly because I had so many things I wanted to fix on it. I'm the type of guy that I can't really leave things broken on my car, and there were just so many little things on the car that I need to fix. I spent over $2,000 on replacing basically all the bushings on the car. Because that's a weak spot on those cars. Basically everything except for the front subframe bushings are a known weakness on that car. So I changed all the control arm bushings, the rear subframe bushings. I even changed the engine motor mount and everything. And so that was costly. And the radio never quite worked because the front speakers would cut out on that car. But man, that car was just fun. It was extremely quick. For highway passing power.
You drove all the way to Spokane.
I drove all the way to Spokane to Andrews just so he can film it, just so we could sell it, which is kind of ironic. But that was an incredible video. That was one of my favorite videos that we did. It was fun. It was awesome. But yeah, it was also not as fuel efficient as I had hoped. So, after a lot of thinking, I was like, I think the responsible thing is instead of trying to keep buying these interesting, 20-year-old cars, previous to that, I had like an 05 Outback XT manual. And then before that, I had the Subaru, I had the 92X Aero. And there were just all these old cars that just kept having issues here and there, and I just didn't want to deal with that as my main daily driver, right? This was supposed to replace my BRZ, a car that I was going to use every single day, so that I could take wear and tear off of my BRZ. Sorry, you're going to say something?
Oh no, just like who on earth could have thought that buying an old Saab would make for a problematic daily driver?
I am shooketh that occurred. No, so yeah, it was such a shame. But anyways, I decided it was time to get rid of that car. And so I was like, well, instead of buying an older car this time around, why not use that money that I had been normally spending to buy a car to finance a newer car, right? Finance a newer car that's, theoretically going to have less issues, buy a warranty on it so I don't have to worry about, if something does break, I have to, cover the cost of that, which is obviously why I bought a GTI, because it's very logical when you're looking for a reliable car to buy a Volkswagen, obviously. So anyways.
How's that working out for you so far?
It's been great. This specific GTI is great.
It's gone into limp mode once already?
Yeah, and after warranties, I already paid out $1,600 of repairs, and for the first 5 weeks of ownership, it was in the shop for 3 of those weeks. But anyways, besides that, So anyways, I had been looking for a GTI for a while, and I did this song and dance where basically, because the Saab was taking so long we had to film it, and then we had to basically get the auction ready for the car and whatnot. It took a while, and so there was a lot of stalling with trying to buy a GTI and trying to like, get the timing of it right to buy a GTI. But long story short, we finally found a GTI at CarMax that I really liked because it had all the features that I was looking for. It was an Autobahn, so it was fully loaded in terms of like the base trim features, but it also had the driver's assistant pack that I really wanted to get the blind spot monitoring on the car. It's really neat because that driver's assistant pack also includes things like forward collision avoidance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It also has, we'll talk about it, but it also has auto cruise, which was really funny. As a manual, it could also speed up and slow down on the freeway, which was actually pretty nice for, those adjustments from like 60 miles an hour down to speed slower than 60 miles an hour, because we would never go above 60 on the freeway.
No.
That'd be insane. But yeah, if traffic were to slow down to like 50, for example, I leave it in, fifth gear or sixth gear and it would adjust at those speeds on the freeway. Obviously, once it gets to about, lower than when the car is about to stall, it will actually disengage the auto cruise control. It will actually tell you, hey, please take over and push in the clutch and whatnot. So it was kind of cool having auto cruise on a manual.
Did it would it kick out of curiosity, because I didn't get a chance to drive that car? Yeah. Would it kick you out of the auto cruise whenever you shifted, or was it?
No, it actually maintained it. It would pause it. It was perfect. So basically, as it accelerated, I could go third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and it would know to pause and then reapply throttle once I've engaged that specific gear.
That's smart.
It was pretty slick auto cruise system for a manual, right? It also had auto park. And so I would scan the spot, and then I would just shift reverse first and bounce the clutch, and it would automatically park it. And it was pretty good. We actually tried it in Chinatown. We were very surprised with the results. It was pretty quick. It does left and right side of the road, and it does perpendicular as well as parallel parking as well.
Love it.
Amazing package. I think it was
crazy that it's a manual and had those features.
Yeah, it's a little odd, right? But in fairness, in an automatic, in most cars, you still have to do that reverse to drive shifting anyways. So I mean, not that different from doing like a reverse to first. So I had all these cool features. It also had the dynamic chassis controls, what Volkswagen calls it, because it has the adaptive dampers, which were very, very comfortable. I really enjoyed that. So I basically fully loaded, except it didn't have DSG, which is like the perfect spec for me. So I had the car for a couple of days, and even in the beginning, I think I kind of felt uncomfortable to purchase in terms of, I think the price was just overall crept up a little bit higher than what I had planned and budgeted for to buying this car, right?
Especially in this inflated used market.
Especially in this inflated used market. That specific configuration, though, was very rare to find like an Autobahn with manual, with adaptive dampers, with the, all the different packages. And so I was like, all right, the price isn't great, but it's also not horrible given the status of everything. So I was like, okay. It was just more than what I had originally planned on spending. But, I bought the car because CarMax has this great benefit where they have a 30-day return policy as long as you don't drive more than 4,000 miles or something like that. If I misspoke, we'll correct it somewhere. I felt pretty confident that like I could drive the car and like, okay, do I actually want this car? And I'm so glad I bought it from CarMax, because a couple days in after purchasing it, because I bought it like I think on a Monday or Tuesday, and then that weekend we actually filmed Anderson's C55 AMG, which I'll also link as well if you're watching this on YouTube. Andrew basically came over that weekend to film that whole thing, and we were going to the movies after we had finished filming his car. We were driving my GTI to the movies, and we were in the steep parking lot where we were heading downhill, and towards the bottom of the hill, the car must have thought that the flat area of the ground was another car or an obstacle.
I think it was a metal plate.
I think it was a metal plate. That must have been what confused radar, because the car just slammed on its brakes. And thankfully I'm going at about like 5 miles an hour, but it was very disconcerting. I was like, did I stall the car or something? Did I get hit? I couldn't tell.
Well, and the person behind you could have hit you.
The person behind me could have hit me, and I think the slope surface was a metal grate as well. I don't know if it's concrete or not, in which case like you would have it's much harder to stop on that metal surface and whatnot. But basically the car slammed on the brakes for no reason. Which I have a problem with, and it's something that we've seen on Teslas. It's something that we've seen on a lot of other cars. And
basically anything with a forward-facing radar.
Yes, anything that has auto cruise tends to also have that as well, because why wouldn't you? You have the hardware. But what's worse now is that more of these cars are having just forward collision avoidance, and you don't even get the benefit of having auto cruise.
Yep.
But yeah, basically the car slammed on the brakes, and I was kind of really annoyed by it, and I tried to turn off the system, and I found out that you can only turn off the system every single time you get in the car. Basically, it resets every time you get in the car, which is common, and it also kept a warning light on my dash when I turned it off, so it was constantly reminding me that I turn off this feature. And I was really frustrated about this, and I did more research, and that's kind of when it started going downhill, which was apparently there was a small class action lawsuit about this against Volkswagen. where cars were not just doing this at low speeds that I was experiencing, they were also doing it at higher speeds on the freeway where it would slam on the brakes. And how the system works is it will slam on the brakes 20 miles an hour worth of speed difference.
Okay.
So basically 20 miles an hour and below, it will come to a complete stop. At 60, it will slow down to 40 before it releases the brake, because it figures once it slams on the brakes, you will take over as the driver, right? And the only way to override it is to floor the gas, which is kind of counterintuitive in some ways. If the car's slamming on the brakes, my first instinct isn't exactly to slam on the gas, because now I'm afraid I'm going to launch the car forward. But basically, class action lawsuit, people are having their Volkswagen slam on the brakes from 60 to 40 miles an hour. And that kind of affected my car search, right? I was just like, do I want this specific car anymore, knowing that this is how Volkswagen functions, right? This is how they R&D, and this is how they put out new features, right? And is this something that other cars are experiencing? I did some more research. A lot of companies now, unfortunately, have forward collision avoidance as standard, so they can't even find a version of the car that doesn't have that package or whatnot.
I believe there's also a legal mandate for that going into effect too.
Is there?
I don't recall the date, and I hope I'm not just spouting this, but I could swear that I remember reading that it is going to be a legally mandated thing in all cars.
Kind of like backup cameras, basically.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you might be onto something. I think it was a forward collision and then either lane keep or
Maybe like
blind spot. I think it was blind spot and rear cross traffic.
Yeah. But I also learned that I looked into Mazda 3s. I thought, but the problem is the Mazda 3 that I wanted was manual, which means that it had to be fully loaded, which means they forced you to have that feature as well. Honda Civic Si has that feature standard as well, and Honda also has a lawsuit about this as well. So just put me in this really weird position. But eventually, I returned the car after 8 days to CarMax. So, here, insert clickbait title of, this is why I returned my car to CarMax. And then I bought this GTI, which is not from CarMax. And I specifically bought this GTI because it had every other feature that I wanted, but didn't have the driver assistant pack. And I was originally kind of bummed looking for one without that package, because I wanted blind spot monitoring, but I realized two things. One, the visibility in this car is so good, I don't actually need blind spot. Two, I actually know how to drive cars, so I don't need to rely on blind spot. My BRZ doesn't have blind spot monitoring. I've been doing just fine. I've never had a car previously with blind spot monitoring. And also the blind spot monitoring on at least the GTI was kind of stupid. I never found a way to make it make a noise. Because you know how, like, if you turn on the turn signal and there is someone in your blind spot, it will beep at you?
Yeah.
I never found a way for it to to beep at me. So it wasn't audible anyways, and also the light was very dim, so I had a hard time seeing it anyway. So it was basically not a useful blind spot system anyways, so I didn't miss it much when I got this car.
And I'm going to interject here because blind spot systems that don't beep make no sense to me.
Tesla?
My parents' Buick.
Tesla?
They've got a Buick Regal Tour X. So
I love
Buick
that thing.
wagon, basically
Looks
the
so
Opal.
cool.
Weird to love Buicks. Like, I'm with you.
Yeah. Well, but technically a Vauxhall insignia thing, right?
Right,
Yeah. Anyways.
Blind spot, no beep.
No
just the light.
no option to...
No option to turn on the beep, just the light, which is completely useless.
Does it rely on, like, if you're about to hit someone, it will just flash the light a little faster or something like that?
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Which kind of defeats the whole purpose of a
Right,
passive driver aid, right?
But you basically have to focus on that little light in order to... But anyways, yeah, so didn't miss that much. But yeah, ended up getting this car, and, obviously never had any issues in terms of that forward collision avoidance. I have other issues. Like I said, I didn't have the car for about 3 weeks in the first 5 weeks, but we won't talk about that. I love the car, don't get me wrong. I guess that kind of triggered some discussions. I talked with Kevin, who's our head researcher at Clutch Kick, and he got very passionate about this. One, because he's very passionate about airplanes, and we'll talk about the relationship with that. And two, he also just finished coding boot camp, so he's very in tune right now with like how software is developed, basically, right? The process of, how a software is written, how it's validated and stuff. And, on our phone, if we have a bug, it's kind of annoying for the most part, right? Short of it not being able to call 911, it doesn't really impact, our well-being. But on a car, if it's not operating the way it's supposed to, that could potentially kill people, which is a very high stakes thing. And so the story that he talked about was the Boeing 737 Maxes, right? Which had the system where basically they didn't engineer the airplane properly, and so it basically constantly had lift, and they would have an automatic system to bring the nose back down. And in the two crashes that occurred, they found that, in a nutshell, the sensor had failed, and they actually originally wanted to have two sensors, but because of cost cutting, they actually went down to one sensor. So once that one sensor, whether it got broken off from debris or just it wasn't functioning correctly, right? It didn't have
So it
another
lacked the
sensor.
redundancy.
It lacked the redundancy, and it wasn't able to cross-reference, the input
So
signal.
it's Tesla vision.
Yeah, we'll talk about that too, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just this idea of there's such a huge focus in engineering right now to lower costs, right? Like I have a friend that worked at Packer. I think, does he still? Yeah, he worked at Packer. He currently works at Amazon, actually helping Rivian develop components for Rivian and whatnot.
Oh, that's cool.
It's really cool, and he's in hardware engineering and testing specifically. And he said that there's a huge focus right now for engineering to not necessarily build things as best as you can, but as cost efficient as you can, and to last just long enough within their warranty period, right? Which is fine for like dash trim that falls off and stuff.
Yeah.
I prefer my software to be very well validated, right? I don't want my software to start glitching after the warranty period and cause accidents on the freeway or something like that, right?
Especially in an older car where you don't get software updates, right?
Right, and it's difficult too. Even like, I'm going to drive to a dealership. Remember to drive to a dealership to get the OS updated. Right? It's not over the air or anything like that.
I want to provide some color to that comment too.
Please do, because I need to eat. I'm really hungry.
So I don't think I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but I've worked for basically every major luxury manufacturer in service. I was a floating service manager. I've worked for pretty much all of the big brands as far as
Audi.
that goes. I'm certified for Audi, Mercedes, Lexus, Acura, Porsche,
Tesla,
Mini, Tesla, Jag Land Rover, and there's one other that's escaping me from our...
All really reliable brands.
Well, Lexus.
Okay.
But, what I want to get at here is that, like, I've worked on all of these. I've worked in service with all of these cars. And even before the focus started turning to cost cutting and making things basically just last their warranty, the kind of stuff that Lewis is chatting about here is very much a problem on all of these cars and has been for a long time. The automatic forward collision avoidance system, that gets triggered erroneously on everything. On every manufacturer that I worked with that had it, every single one of them, I would get customers complaining about it triggering for no reason. Most commonly, it's caused by like signs above you on the highway.
I think it's a metal thing, like Andrew was saying, because the way metal interacts with the radar, it assumes it's a car, right? Metal, it panics.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And like even so knowing that was a problem, even when the focus was on let's build these systems to the very best of our ability, the idea of them cost cutting to do that is terrifying to me. And actually, I think it's kind of works backwards too. Like, I really don't want every conversation to become about Tesla, but they are doing some really interesting stuff in the industry. And they used to have it with their ultrasonic. I even looked this up to double check myself to prepare for this, but it used to be that the radar could see under the car in front of you and see up to 2 cars ahead.
Yep.
Getting rid of that in favor of vision is objectively worse. And so this focus on removing redundancies and just cost cutting, it's kind of terrifying to think about when with all these cars on the road that people are getting into every day.
I get cost cutting in terms of like the accountant's point of view, right? We've talked about this before in terms of like why sports cars aren't being built as prominently as they used to be, right? Like why BMW focuses more on luxury rather than driving experience, right? That's where they want to spend the money, and that's where their accountants have decided that statistically they're going to sell more cars to the general public rather than that diehard enthusiast. They spend X amount of more R&D money on driving experience versus refinement. Fair enough. But the consequences of that isn't death, right? The consequences of messing up a driver assistant system, though, is potentially catastrophic, right? And so, but the other part of this argument too, I guess, this discussion is that, I have that system on my car. What if I wanted to turn it off, right? Like, from my perspective as a driver, the way I drive, right? I'm constantly focused, and the way I drive apparently triggers these systems. I should be able to turn it off, and I shouldn't have to turn it off every single time I get into the car. I shouldn't have to constantly look at this bright yellow light in my dash telling me that I've turned off the safety system. And then, dealerships aren't going to code this out for you because it's literally, it's kind of like if they permanently turn off traction control for you. They're not going to do that, obviously, right? They're also not going to disable your airbags for you. But the problem with this system, it's kind of the equivalent of the airbag is going off randomly when I'm not having a crash. And if that were occurring, I would want them to turn it off for me, right? Until they figure it out. right? And that's what we're dealing with here, right? We're dealing with a cost-cutting measure that has potentially fatal consequences, and no one's really talking about this. Everyone's only talking about it in terms of Tesla, right? They're cutting out radar, and you know, that's where the conversation is going, but not for every other car, which has these technologies now, right? Your Corolla has a standard now. You can't buy Corolla without forward collision avoidance.
Do you think when they program these systems, they're erring on the side of caution, and they would rather have a false positive than have it miss
Then a false negative.
a car in front, right? Is this why they're triggering the phantom braking, all that? Are they coding them to say, okay, well, maybe that was a car versus holy crap, we missed that semi?
While I would say yes, but I think that given the number of manufacturers who have the same issue, I find it hard to believe that they're all taking the exact same approach to the way that they code that. Like, and again, I hate to say it, but like Tesla very specifically they have a different philosophy from everybody else in the industry as far as that goes.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse. And yeah, in some ways it's great, in some ways it's absolutely terrible. But I don't think it's necessarily a mindset thing. I think it can be, but I also think that it is perhaps a limitation of the technology, because right now everybody does it in the same way. It's a forward-facing radar.
Yep.
And I think that there's some limitation inherent to that technology where it just detects those false positives, and unless you're willing to pay for that redundant system to counteract that, there's not really a great way around that.
Yeah.
So you get into the question of like LiDAR, because LiDAR is crazy expensive as of today to implement in most cars. A combination of LiDAR and radar, or of LiDAR or a camera, add vision in there. We're at a point right now where it seems like, like you say, manufacturers are trying to get the most out of these existing technologies, but really the way forward is probably combining.
In my personal opinion, in terms of false positive versus false negative, I think it's slightly worse to have a false positive, because if you have a false negative and someone ends up not stopping in time and hitting something, technically that was the driver's fault, right?
That was kind of going to happen anyway.
At the end of the day, you were supposed to be responsible for the car.
Sure.
A false positive is not the driver's fault, right? It's the car slamming on the brakes for no reason when I'm driving on the freeway and there's no one in front of me.
You can't expect that.
I can't expect that. And then let's say someone's mid-lane change, right? And then they didn't realize that the car that they were lane changing into just slammed on their brakes, right? Like, there's a reason why, even though it is their fault for slamming into you, I still don't slam on my brakes randomly on the freeway for fun. I don't brake check people for fun. I don't want to deal with being rear-ended, even if from the perspective of the law, it wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't want my car doing that automatically for me either.
Sure.
Right? So I would say, for me at least, my perspective on this at this moment is that a false positive is worse than a false negative.
It's probably important in like the midst of all of this to note that I do believe that generally these are good things. Like these technologies, like they save lives, they reduce the impact in an accident, Generally speaking, for having these issues with them, I do think that they're still doing good work and I'm glad these technologies exist. Just they need to be better.
I think there should be more validation. And I know with software it's impossible to get something 100% perfect.
Especially with the variables you have on the road and everything like that.
But I think with something like this, when the potential consequences can be very fatal, I think the verification has to be much higher. And I worry that as we get into, like I said, as we get into an era of engineering that's all about cost cutting, this is not an area I want to be, within that scope, right? Like,
so circling back to your GTI here, that brings up an interesting point. It's like, so you were in the market for a vehicle.
Oh yeah.
And you deliberately went and got a lower spec, a lower trim.
Yep.
To not have these features.
Yep.
Which on a used car you can do. But now look at the new car market. It's getting harder and harder to find models. And in many ways, it's like the climate control. It's like the touchscreen climate, right?
Yep.
It's getting harder and harder to find models that don't have these features because they're building them as necessity.
Yeah. On the Kia EV6, the higher trim gets the capacitive heated seat buttons, and the lower trim gets the physical buttons, which would make me buy the cheaper one for that reason.
Capacitive buttons in the car.
No, you're right.
The worst.
And also, like you guys were saying, like if it becomes mandated, then you won't have a choice. You can't go seek out a lower spec one. They're all going to have it, right?
Well, it's like there's a rumor, maybe not a rumor, it might be a bill that's being proposed that cars are going to have to be able to detect if you're inebriated or not before they start. Not like a straight up, blow and go, but somehow through their driver assistant aids, be it the infrared eye tracking or whatnot, that the car has to be able to tell if you're drunk or not before it'll.
You have to do a
go.
speech test before you drive off.
And this is something they're proposing as like a requirement for future vehicles,
Wow.
which is kind of crazy.
That wouldn't entirely shock me. In my Mercedes, it has a
Drowsy centers?
I think it's called attention assist.
Yep.
Where it looks at
coffee
like
cup, right?
the coffee cup. It looks at your behaviors while you're driving, and it says, "Oh, hey, you might be getting drowsy. Maybe it's time to pull over and take a break." So yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they could get some of that using some kind of machine learning.
I think it's really hard to strike that balance between safety and also like it not being a reliance, right? Now people are going to get drunk and then they'll be like, well, I'll just rely on my car to tell me if I'm safe enough to drive.
I'll
right?
autopilot my way home.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the one of the downsides of where we're at in the history of the auto industry is that we're in a place where we have cars where your car can just about drive you, almost, kinda, sorta, Super Cruise, autopilot. The systems are getting pretty good where they can mostly do it, but we're not there.
That's a category on certain websites that are black and orange. This is a family-friendly show, but certain websites are black and orange. Kids, don't ask your parents what we're talking about, but certain websites where people are very affectionate towards each other.
While the car's driving.
Yeah, while Tesla's driving, it will be a category when you look it up for these videos.
I think you could say these driver assistance
Features are just good enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at.
Ooh, that's a line.
That's a take right there.
Wow. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, it's like, cruise control, you're not going to rely on to drive you across the state.
Yeah.
It's just silly. You're going to be paying attention. You add in lane keep assist. Well, okay, now you start to get a little bit more dangerous, right? It's like, now I can steer within the lanes, but I know it can't take those corners, right? And my car's got a vision-based lane keep assist.
Yep.
Where it'll
But you
guide
don't
me in the lane.
But you don't have auto cruise, which is such a.
I don't have auto cruise, but it's great because it
forces you to be attentive.
It forces me to be
basically.
attentive, and it doesn't have the phantom braking. But now you throw in radar cruise, stop and go auto cruise, and lane keep assist, and while you're not quite level 2 yet, now it starts to get a little bit more dangerous. By the time you reach Tesla's autopilot or Super Cruise or any of these other ones, well, now you're just going to completely lose your guard, especially on a longer trip, right? It's fatiguing driving 4, 5, 6 hours.
Yeah.
And you need to take breaks, but maybe these systems push you to skip that break, if you don't have to pee. And now you're even more tired, but it's okay because the car's got your back until it doesn't.
So it's kind of like a weird curve, right? So as we get more and more safety features, it's getting more and more safe. But there is a pivot point, a tipping point, where all of a sudden you get too comfortable and like a false insecurity, and then it starts being less safe again, right?
It's actually a real bummer too, because when used correctly, these systems are amazing. When I used to work for Tesla, I used to do a lot of driving into the mountains when I lived in Colorado, and so we would do test drive events and whatnot in the mountain towns.
Yep.
And so I would frequently do anywhere from like a 4 to 7 hour road trips into the mountains to go to these events. And driving on I-70 west through the mountains, it's a challenging drive, especially with traffic, because there's lots of winding roads. There's, all these cars around you. It's a lot, and it's mentally taxing. When Autopilot came out, I worked at Tesla I started there right before Autopilot came out, the original version. And
7.0.
And going and rolling through the mountains on Autopilot, I couldn't really trust the car to do everything to 100% handle the mountains, but it freed me up to where instead of only being able to pay attention to the road, but now with Autopilot, it freed me up. I knew the car could handle that curve, so I could look and double check, okay, there's no car there, I can change lanes. It made that drive, it turned it from a stressful drive into a very relaxing drive through the mountains.
Which, again, if used correctly, it actually makes you a better, safer driver because you can be more attentive.
Yep, it's got eyes everywhere.
And I think even just auto cruise in general, if I don't have to modulate the throttle constantly, that allows me to kind of, be able to check my surroundings better. So again,
I can trust the car's going to stop for the
intentions
person
of
in
these
front of me.
systems are just so good, right? Like the intentions of these systems truly were to make you a better driver. But I think human nature takes over, and we always get lured into a false sense of security with when we have like these safeguards in place, right? Which is such a shame because they can be very powerful and great tools to help us be safer drivers.
We're also assuming everyone on the road is the same level of competence, same level of awareness, and we know that's not the case. How many times do you see that?
They're all systems with really good intents, but I think because we are on the cusp of this self-driving revolution, if it happens, I guess. Now there's even some talk going around that they don't think it's even really feasible.
I think the problem is still until there are no human drivers on the road, we're not capable of programming computers smart enough to comprehend random human behavior still. I mean, I'm sure it will happen, but I think we're talking decades rather than.
You also can't program for every edge case. Remember
Yes.
the truck carrying the stoplight, the street sign?
Oh,
that triggered the autopilot into thinking that there was a light that turned yellow and red in front?
Please add article right here. Bookmark, screenshot that.
So,
You're kidding me.
Yeah. It was and what engineer would think that, a construction truck would be carrying a upright traffic light in its back? And the Tesla would come up right behind it and then now read that as an actual stoplight.
And slam on the brakes, right?
So it's like, you can't count for every edge case, right? The best you can do is come up with machine learning and AI that can maybe think on its own and think ahead, but...
Yeah, the AI should be smart enough to cross-reference with GPS data of where existing stoplights are to then see, like, oh, maybe that's... But again, there should be a way to override that, right? Like, if it's about to slam on the brakes, I should be able to press a button. I shouldn't have to slam on the gas. I think that's kind of counterintuitive for me to say, hey, car, stop doing whatever it is that you're trying to do to save my life. I know what's best.
Although the question there is like reaction times, right? Like how fast does that happen and how much time do you actually have to hit a button? Because accidents happen in a split second, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the problem with these systems that will first warn you and then do actual braking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because engineers now have to strike a balance of, okay, we need it late enough so that we don't get those false positives that we're worried about. But then if it's too late, then slamming on the brake's not going to do anything anyways. And so, like when do you have the car actually take over, right?
I mean, it's a hard situation. Like
Hard.
nothing
From a programming perspective too, like that is an incredible technical challenge.
Yeah.
So
Anymore, I'm starting to genuinely believe that, like, and this pains me a little bit to say it because, you want to talk about a company that likes to cut costs, but General Motors and Super Cruise actually honestly might be the right approach to this, at least for the foreseeable future, where they build it to handle one aspect of driving really, really well, which is highways, which is the easiest for a self-driving car.
And also where you're most likely to use it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't feel like I need the car to do everything for me within the city anyways, right? I feel like I should be paying attention to that situation. But yeah, it's those freeway trips that these systems are really, really good for. And really they should be focusing on mastering that rather than trying to like, oh, well, now we're going to make it drive in the city.
Which is funny because, driving in the city is the hardest part to program for, and it's the least likely area you're going to use it.
Yeah.
So the cost versus reward is even worth it.
That's true. That's true.
Although, don't get me wrong, if my car could drive itself in the city, driving through a big city like Seattle traffic and whatnot would certainly be...
There's no AI in the world within the next 100 years that will be able to compensate for Seattle traffic. It won't be able to account for people walking in the middle of the street. It won't be able to account for people turning right when they signal left. It won't be able to account for the pothole that magically appeared overnight. It won't be able to account for a bridge that suddenly shut down one day for no reason.
But I thought Robotaxi was coming out.
Well, how are the and I genuinely don't know, so I ask, what about like the trials that Waymo is running in California? Because they have the self-driving taxis out there.
I thought they were kind of fed up with that. I thought they were like about to give up.
I think Uber was partnering with Waymo and they shut that division down. I may be wrong, but I think I read an article where they're like shuttering that.
Please comment below if we're wrong, but I think they were burning through so much cash.
They realized it's just not worth it.
The guy who founded, I think George Hotz, who did Comma.ai, he basically said self-driving. He's like, yeah, no, it's not happening. This is entirely too much.
You probably remember this line from Top Gear, which was that, they talked about self-driving cars probably like 10 years ago in an episode of the news. And he was talking about like, I don't have a robot to fetch my slippers. How is it possible that we have cars that are going to drive us, right? And I think about my robotic vacuum, which isn't able to, our first floor has too much square footage. No, it's true though, right? Because technically that's AI, and it has like, I don't know if there's a robotic vacuum that's like smart enough to do the job 100% perfect, that doesn't fall off the cliff or get stuck in whatever, even though it's constantly mapping something. My vacuum, granted, is a couple of years old, but it's not smart enough to realize like, when it's on low battery, its priority isn't to go back to the charging station, it's to finish the job, which it should know by now. It has never finished a job because our first floor is too big. It doesn't have enough battery power to cover.
Achiever.
Yeah, it's so stupid. So we always find it like, under a couch or like in the dark corners of the laundry room or something like that. And so it's just idiotic. So if you have a better iRobot at home, if you have a better Roomba at home, please let me know and tell me the square footage of the area that's covering. But if that thing can't vacuum properly, I can't trust that we as humans are able to program a car to operate in the real world, you know? I'm just not convinced of that.
Well, you can do what the Roomba does and just like make it so cars bounce off of everything to get where they're going.
And
make everything a bumper car.
Andrew and I were at Kura yesterday, which is a conveyor belt sushi place, which has replaced waiters for like the getting water and getting the wasabi portion. And it took forever for it to come to bring us the stuff. And like, I can't even get my cup of water and my wasabi delivered properly. I can't count on a car to drive itself properly, dude.
And drive your whole family.
And drive my whole family, dude. I just can't.
I do suspect that Volkswagen and Mercedes and GM are investing a whole hell of a lot more money into the development of these systems than a Roomba is, though. So there is that.
I would hope so. But I'm also, again, it goes back to cost cutting. I worry that accountants are going to step in. People with pencils and briefcases are going to step in. And they're going to tell the engineers they don't need to get to as high level of validity as possible. They're like, 95% accuracy is good enough.
Well, and you've got economies of scale, right?
It's like we're no longer looking at $75,000 Teslas plus, right? We've got to make this technology affordable to stick in a Corolla.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. Yes, it doesn't work in a $100,000, Porsche, Volvo, Tesla. How is it going to work in a $25,000 hatchback, right? Like, I just, oh man, it's just.
Here's something to think about, though, too, and I think this is a pretty common refrain. It's not so much that it has to be perfect.
Yep.
Ideally, yes, it's perfect, never gets in accidents, it can handle every situation. But it doesn't really have to be perfect, it just needs to be better than us.
Yep.
And, if you've
And it needs to be
there,
easily updatable too, right? So as time goes on, in 5 years, the software engineers have a new version of it that like, oh, hey, we figured out the algorithm's a little bit better. Let's push that to the older cars, right? So that older cars don't continue having the problems of it. It needs to evolve.
Yeah.
Right? That's another part too, right? It doesn't have to be perfect from the get-go. It has to be as perfect as possible, right? Because
Sure, of
lives are at
course.
stake.
Absolutely.
But there has to be a willingness to get better, and I don't see that right now, right? Like when these issues happen, what do? You take it to the dealership. Dealership can't do jack, right? Because they can't program it for you. That's not their job. Their job is to load better firmware on there. And if the manufacturer isn't pushing out better software to operate, the existing hardware, like you're kind of stuck with the product that is, operating at a certain defective rate, right? Like let's say it's operating at like a 95% effective rate. It's going to be like that for the rest of its life. Like I don't want to keep that car,
But if that 95% is still better than you as a driver and has a lower accident rate than you as a driver, people are still going to be uncomfortable with the idea that even though they know it's better, statistically it's proven to be better, the lack of control for people is what gives them pause. Because that car might get in an accident one day and there's nothing you can do. You're just along for the ride.
I mean, it's those edge cases, right? Like, but I think it's also difficult for us as car enthusiasts too, and so we kind of have to take a step back because we are generally going to be better drivers than the general public because because we like cars and we have this passion to get better at driving, right? To refine our craft in driving. Whereas most of the general public sees this as like a normal chore, right? So they don't have that.
This is the thing they have to do.
Correct.
So that's an interesting point because I think there's a study out there that shows that individuals always overestimate their skills, their driving skills.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. With the laws of averages, at least 50% of people have to be worse than the average driver. But if you ask 100 people, they're all going to say they're better. They're better than the average driver.
Yeah.
The rule of averages says 50% of people have to be worse than you.
I mean, yeah.
And I think if you compare driving to air travel, that's another area where statistically air travel is like one of the safest forms of transportation out there.
Yep.
Even with the occasional crash every now and then, there's so many planes and so many people moving daily that it is hands down one of the safest forms of transportation. Yet people are more scared to get on an airplane than to get in their car. When the likelihood of them dying in their car
is far higher.
Is leagues higher than getting on an airplane because of the lack of control.
Yep.
Right.
So
people have trouble turning that over. But I think once it becomes, obviously millions and millions of people I guess I don't know the exact number. I assume millions travel every single day on airplanes, or at least millions every month or whatever.
Yeah.
But, you know, people have overcome that fear. And I do think that we're going to get to a point with self-driving cars. Like, there's so many technologies that could make a huge difference in that. Car-to-X communication, the price of LiDAR coming down, the combination of those sensors, better machine learning, over-the-air updates to continue to improve those systems. You know, there's so many technologies that are going to come together that I think we can get close to. Even if we don't achieve a true self-driving car, I think we can get close. But people, no matter how good it is, people are going to have trouble giving up that control until it becomes a commonplace everyday thing, like air travel is now. You know, most people have I think today, in 2022, have no second thoughts whatsoever about getting on an airplane and turning over that control. Like, it's fine. We do it. It's an acceptable risk.
Yeah. But maybe 60 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Right? Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I think especially early on, you know, people are going to be really anxious about turning over to these technologies for cars. But I do think it's going to be, with time, something that we're more used to and more... You know, you drive up to the highway and the car knows you're on the highway, so it just automatically, cool. All cars drive themselves on the highway in 2040. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think I think we genuinely could get to that point where that kind of thing is even mandated.
But I think even when it's getting to that level of competency, there should still always be a way for the human to take over effectively. Right? Because for those specific edge cases where there's a truck carrying a freaking stoplight and the Tesla gets confused, right? Because, like... It needs to be there, and it will be there for people that are going to have that level of driver awareness, that are going to be able to utilize that override if need be.
I think it's also about intent too. Like, hey, I want to drive over. My wife drives a Jeep Grand Cherokee. I really want to drive over this curb at Starbucks. It's in my soul. I have to drive over this curb. I can't tell my car to do that.
Yeah.
I have to take the wheel and do that. And so, like you say, I mean, there's always, I think, going to be a need to be able to control this 5,000-pound machine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my GTI is not 5,000 pounds, but that'd be really bad. That's the new BMW 2 Series. I think about how, like, when I'm in the snow for the BRZ, like, it literally won't work with traction control, right? Because in its nature, it's like, you will not have wheel spin. Mm-hmm. You will not have wheel spin, right? But in snow, you need it to slip the tires a little bit. And so I have full traction control off in my BRZ when I'm in the snow. And I think there'll be situations like that where, like, you know, we're on the open freeway, someone's about to slam behind me. I need a way to be able to very quickly tell the car, stop panic braking. I need to override and get moving. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't think that will be detrimental. I think having an override won't be detrimental to the general public.
Oh, yeah.
Because the general public's not going to think fast enough to use features like that, I think. But it will be there for the people that are, like, aware of their surroundings, and I see someone's about to rear end me and my car's braking and I have to tell it to move forward, basically, right? That'll give the benefit to the attentive driver without sacrificing safety for, you know, the more average driver.
Yeah.
I think.
So that brings up an interesting point here, and that's the overcomplication of these systems. And kind of where I want to lead that is, you know, with these daytime running lamps, like last night. How many cars do we see with DRLs because they think those are the headlights, and they're now unsafely driving without headlights and taillights on, right? And what it is it's an overcomplication of a system that should be very simple: headlights on, off.
Yeah.
But you've thrown in, you know, one extra thing, and again, you know, average person, right? Not everyone's a car enthusiast. Not everyone's technologically literate.
Yeah.
And now you're throwing so much different tech and so many different features at people. You know, are they safely utilizing it, or are they being, you know, inundated with things they don't understand?
This is a good quick segue and shout out to other videos on our channel. I think it will probably be out by the time you see this, if you're watching this on YouTube. We're going to cover the Seattle Auto Show later today, and actually a big focus of what we're going to be talking about at the Seattle Show is really just interior usability and how the average driver is going to use, like, the modern car. Yep. That'll be a big focus, so stay tuned for that. Because that is going to be a big differentiator in cars moving forward, right? It's not how they drive, because most normal cars drive the same nowadays. It's really going to be how usable is everything, right?
Yeah. How
can my mother use it? You know, she doesn't speak any English, right? So she needs climate control knobs that have symbols, and it's very obvious. She's not going to dig through 3 submenus to turn on, you know, the AC. That's crazy. That she's not going to figure it out. She has 2 apps on her iPhone, all right? So she's not going to figure out these models modern systems, which even we can't figure out, dude. I was looking
They're
at
hard.
it's so hard. We're in this stuff, and we're in technology, we're into cars, and we can't even figure out some of these things. I can't expect my mother to figure it out, man.
I really think the best thing at this point, and this will go off in a different direction, so I don't really want to go down this road necessarily, but to all the major auto manufacturers, just give up, turn it over to CarPlay and Android Auto, let Apple and Google do the thing that they've done for the last 20, 30 years. Just please.
You want a cost cut? License it.
Yeah.
Stop spending like your own, like for everyone to develop, and that's why that's one thing I did like about the Polestar is the Android Auto interface. Because no matter my frustrations with that, 100% it's better than anything that Volvo would come up with their 5 engineers that they have on that project, right? Versus Google's like
My mom had an S90 with the most, I think it was a 2020 or 2021 S90.
Yeah.
And the system that was just the pure Volvo system, and it would do CarPlay and everything, which was a million times better. But the standard Volvo system was usable, but not good.
Yeah.
And not laid out in an intuitive way. Digging through menus, nothing about using it felt good. There is nothing about they've not done a good job of making any of this accessible and user friendly.
Yep.
And if we have drivers who can't figure out the difference between their DRLs and their headlights, Lord help us when they get on the road with their self-driving cars and try to turn stuff on.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the new Mark 8 GTI. We noticed yesterday, I learned for the first time that not only does it have like haptic touch, not haptic, I don't even know if they're haptic, but touch buttons for the headlights and stuff, for auto, off, parking lights and stuff over here. I learned that the defrosters are there too. So the front defroster for the vent and the rear defroster are located near the lights, which I didn't even think of. Like, looking at the pictures. No, why isn't it near the stupid climate control buttons? Why is it near the stupid light buttons?
Like every other car.
Yeah, I don't understand the logic of why would it be. Yeah, it's just crazy stuff like that.
It's designed by committee, I think, and that's the problem, right? It's everyone gets together and says, well...
I'm more worried. That means there's a big chunk of people that think it should have been designed that way, right? Right? If it's designed by committee, X amount of people had to say, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Sure, let's go with that.
Yeah, that makes
Well,
sense.
I think they're looking at the competitors and saying, hey, they did that, let's do this too. But as we kind of touched on last night, then they react too slowly. So like Honda removed the volume knob.
Yep.
Huge problem. Everyone complained.
They brought it back within 4
back.
model years. Yep.
But now Volkswagen's like, hold my beer, we get to try this. And already they're bringing buttons back to the steering wheels. So
Everyone needs to have a phase of trying out haptic controls. They need to all get it out of their system. It's like a rite of passage for cars nowadays, is you have to have an era of cars where you have idiotic controls. And I think I say this in every single video now, unfortunately, whether it be in our podcast like this or in our reviews, because it's so prominent. I keep saying this: technology should make our lives easier, not worse. And most of the stuff that's coming out right now is just making things worse. How we change our climate control has been worse. I don't understand. I hate to be that guy too, right? I was worried last night that I was like, am I becoming a boomer?
Well, I mean, it very much is the old argument every time. It's like, oh, I don't like cars that have seat belts because you can't tell me to wear a seat belt.
I don't, and so it makes me worry, like as a journalist, am I being objective about this? Am I being that guy that's like, oh, yeah, I only like my BRZ because it doesn't have, steering wheel controls and that it doesn't have a lot of safety systems? Like, am I being that guy, or are we actually in like this point in cars right now that it's getting so fussy and so complicated and having so many crutches that it really is about to become a problem? Are we really at that tipping point that I was talking about, right? Where cars have been getting safer and safer. I like my seatbelts. I like traction control. I like ABS. I like airbags, but maybe I don't like having my car automatically brake for you, right? Are we actually at that pivot point now? Because I think, in my opinion, several generations of car enthusiasts go, yeah, it is idiotic for them to say, oh, I like not having a headrest. I like only having a lap belt or no lap belt at all. TJ Hunt, who is a famous YouTuber, he built a Mustang, and it's based on the Tokyo Drift build where he put the Nissan Skyline engine in like this old body Mustang. It's like a 450 wheel horsepower build. He doesn't have seatbelts in it because that car didn't come with seatbelts.
That's actually kind of terrifying.
He was like, yeah, I don't want to have any more horsepower. I was like, bro, you're too past that point. So I don't want to be that car enthusiast, right? I don't want to be that guy that's just like, oh, I hate that modern cars have ABS that interfere with the driver. Because I think most of these features that have been introduced in like the 90s and the early 2000s, I genuinely think they have been helping people be safe.
Well,
They have
and
safe
it goes
roads.
back to not everyone's a good drivers. I think they are.
Yes.
Throw someone behind the wheel of a rear-wheel drive Ferrari, turn off all the driver assists, and see how long before they're sideways in a
Yeah,
bridge.
yeah.
I don't think you even have to go that far, but you put an average driver in a car. I really don't care what it is,
Yeah.
but give them a car in bad inclement weather with none of the traction aids or anything like that. I think the average driver would struggle greatly.
No, you give them the aids and they would still struggle.
Well, yeah,
'Cause
but
they
I mean, but doubly so, right? Like the average driver, yeah. I don't think you even have to go all the way out to like performance examples, but just
Yeah.
the average car now with all of these nannies and systems has gotten so easy to drive that you can, I can go drive through the snow. My car's all-wheel drive, but like I can go drive through the snow without ever thinking about it. It's easy.
We live in an interesting time, I think, as car enthusiasts, where we kind of have to balance embracing new technology, but also, appreciating what cars are all about, which is driving, not just the technology aspect of it. And I think it's a tough balance to find. Like when I bought this GTI, this is the newest model GTI that I could find that had the nicer leather and the upgrade sound system, but didn't have the driver assistant features. As you went on later in the model years, it became more and more standard, and so you basically had to settle for a not as nice car in order to not have these safety features. Because they obviously build them, and also. They want to be able to brag that, like, hey, we have this standard safety feature now. So it's tough. It's tough. But, I'm kind of appreciative that I have the cars that I do and the exact model years that I do, because, Andrew was saying that, like, hey, you have a BRZ and GTI, which is probably regarded as, like, two of, some of the greatest enthusiast daily cars that someone can have for under $30,000. And I just feel fortunate that I was able to pick up something like this. And also, I like Mark 7 a lot more than Mark 8, but we'll talk about that in a different video. But
Good luck when it comes time to replace these.
that's the thing, right? I always fear for the day, like, okay, when this gets old and tired, when I buy another one, I have to buy another one of the same year, but with lower mileage or something like that. Because, even like BRZ nowadays, the automatic one has forward collision avoidance now. Thankfully, the manual one doesn't. And so it's tough. It's tough, and so I think I will always applaud automotive manufacturers that still hold on to the manual transmission and also still have features that you can turn off. Specifically things like B&Ws where even though they give you manual transmission, it's a rev matching manual transmission, and you can't turn off rev matching unless you turn off stability control. So it's basically way too binary, I guess. But that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, let us know what you think in the comments below. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, blah blah blah. And
Smash that like button.
Smash that like button. But yeah, let us know where you stand on this, because I want to hear what enthusiasts think, but also what the general public thinks in terms of these features. Because I know for a lot of people that don't care about driving, it can be a really great safety feature for them. But like we said in the previous podcast episode, they are getting too good, right? These safety features are getting so good that it can quickly become something that actually becomes counterproductive and actually becomes dangerous.
If you are an enthusiast, please make your Prius driving friend watch this video and comment their opinion.
No, we just want them to turn on their DRLs. That's it. That's it. Have a good day. Take care. Goodbye.